Hello, and thank you for choosing this recorded webinar on 5 search mistakes you can easily avoid or fix. I'm Ted Karen at the ProQuest Dialog Help Desk, and we appreciate your taking time today to learn some of the fine points about using ProQuest Dialog. I hope this brief presentation will enhance your search experience and help to make your searches go smoother and easier. Now, we're going to be talking about search mistakes, but it would be a mistake to think of these as common errors because, in fact, the most common result by far in using ProQuest Dialog is to have no errors at all. The search engine is designed to let you do everything from the simplest kind of Google-type search all the way through some very complex combinations of search statements, and really it's very seldom you're going to encounter any kind of a technical glitch. When there are problems, most of the time we find that it is good old human error. And most of these are basically simple typos, but they can be subtle in the ways that they present. They may not kind of jump out at you. And so if you know what these mistakes are, you can more easily avoid them in the first place, or if the mistake does occur, you can more easily spot it and correct it if you know what to look for, and then you can go on and complete your search successfully. So today we're going to look at 5 kinds of search mistakes that can happen, and we're going to count them down. It's sort of a top 5 list. So we'll start with number 5. In honor of the late David Bowie, I'm calling this one a Space Oddity Part 1. And here is an example of what that looks like. Now, if you look at this search, I think you can tell what it is we're trying to do here, and it looks pretty good. The idea is to search for the exact phrase ground control in the title field of any records, but there's something wrong here. Can you see what it is? The problem is this space here. You want to close that space down, because if you have it like this, the search engine is going to think you're looking for the word TI as well as the words ground control, and there really is no word TI, so you're going to get 0 hits or very few, and it's not going to be what you want. So it is a good technique to limit your searches to specific fields, but when you do so, make sure you push that field code right up against the open paren. That's the way to make it work correctly. Here is another example. Here we are looking for the phrase ground control in any of the 3 fields, title or abstract or subject. And this time we have remembered not to put a space right before the open paren, but the problem is we put spaces here, and you don't want to do that. You want to close up those spaces when you do this kind of search, and if you do it this way, it will work correctly. So you see the difference. Make sure you tighten that up. And once you know to look out for that, this is a very easy mistake to avoid, and your searches will run fine. So let's move on to number 4. This is a Space Oddity Part 2. And in a sense, this is kind of the flip side of the one we just looked at. Let's look at an example. Here we are searching for the word dog. And we also want either train or discipline, truncated, to be in the record. But there's a problem with this search. And the problem is that we wanted to leave a space here next to the and. If you don't put a space there, then the search engine thinks that you're looking for train or discipline in the AND field. And there is no such field, so you're not going to get a proper result. You'll get an error message. You want to leave a space there in this case. Here is another example. Here we are using the near connector, the N3, but we have forgotten to leave a space before the N3, and that is going to get an error message. You need to have a space there. Anytime you have a connector like and or a proximity connector like near or pre, you want to have a space on either side of that. So to review the first 2 points that we've looked at, when you have parentheses next to a field code, such as title or abstract, you do not leave a space in here. When you have a connector like and or near or pre, then you must leave a space before the parentheses. Just be aware of these things and you will not make this mistake, and your searches will run fine. So let's move on to number 3. This one is called the or error, or the or error. What the heck is that? It is actually more common than you might suspect, and it looks like this. You end up with a fairly long statement sometimes that is a series of terms OR'd together, and if you look closely at this, you may spot the problem. It's right here. You see, someone has used the word or twice in a row, and logically, it just doesn't make any sense. So it's not going to run correctly. It's going to get an error message. This kind of thing can happen when you are editing a search that someone else has prepared or that you had run earlier, and then you decided to take a term out. When this happens, it's usually for a reason like this. You might have begun with a search like this, and then perhaps noticed that over here you've got shift or shifts, and you really don't need both because ProQuest Dialog will search automatically for the plural. So you say, well, let's take out shifts. We don't really need it. So the problem is if you take that out, you need to remember to also take out the or that is next to it, because this is how you end up with that or problem. So simply when you do take out one of a series of terms that are or'd together, remember to take out one of the ors with it as well, and then it will run correctly. So let's move on to number 2, mismatched quotes. Now this slide shows us an example because, as you can see, one of these quotes is straight up and down, and the other is a curly quote, or they would call it a smart quote. The problem is the search engine does not recognize these two styles as being a matched pair. And so if you run this in your search, you'll get an error that says mismatched quotes. It used to be that a mismatched quotes error always meant that you had perhaps an open quote and you forgot to put a closed quote, or vice versa. Or perhaps you started with a double quote and ended with a single quote. But more recently, as Word and other programs have begun to get more varied and more sophisticated with different styles of presenting quotation marks, you can get a mismatched quote problem where you have both an open and a closed quote, but they don't quite look like each other. This happens, I think, when someone drafts a strategy or saves a strategy on one platform, and then there's an attempt to edit it or to fix the strategy later using a slightly different program or on another computer. So notice these 3 different styles of quote. They don't quite look alike, and understand any of these is fine as long as they match each other in any given pair. What you don't want is to accidentally mix and match them so that the open quote does not match the closed quote. So what I would suggest is, if you're going to edit or rework an existing strategy, be careful with the quotation marks, and if you find you need to add an open quote or a closed quote where one was missing, go ahead and retype both the open and the closed quote. That way you can make sure they will match, and you will not have this problem. And that brings us to the number 1 search mistake to be either avoided or fixed, which is parentheses problems. This can be a source of frustration even for the experienced searcher. Let's start with the fact that parentheses are a very powerful and an important tool in ProQuest Dialog searching. You will want to use them anytime you are ORing together multiple terms. You definitely need to use the parentheses if you are combining ORed together terms as well as the AND connector in the same search statement like this. You may also want to use parentheses when you're using the near connector or the pre connector, just to kind of set apart that section of your search. This particular search actually would work fine if you didn't use the parentheses, because the search engine would apply the near connector before it applied the AND connector. But Clearly, it is easier to read and to understand if you use the parentheses. You can also nest parentheses, or in other words, use parentheses inside of parentheses in order to build out a search statement that combines multiple concepts with alternate choices for each of several different concepts, and that is perfectly fine. That's all within the ProQuest Dialog search rules. The problem is, the more complicated these searches get, the greater the chance that sooner or later human error will creep in at some point, and you end up with either one parenthesis too few or too many. And actually, that has happened here. If you look at this, this search will not run correctly. I happen to know what the issue is. This needs another parenthesis right here. So if you study it, you might be able to spot that without too much trouble. But there are some techniques for dealing with the original error. Let's go back to that to try to sort it out. One way to fix this is just to break down this one long search into several smaller, simpler searches, and then use and or to combine those simpler sets one step at a time so that it's easier to avoid a mistake. Another thing you can do is to start by copy-pasting all of this into a Word document so that you can work with it. And then you would use copy-paste to start running different parts of it one at a time in the search engine. Start with some part of it that you can see will definitely work. And then try another part. And keep adding more and more until the mistake happens. And in that way, you may be able to narrow down the part of the search that is causing the problem. But there's another way you can deal with this when it happens, and that is to just ask us for help. Here at the help desk, we're accustomed to dealing with complex searches. We have developed techniques for dealing with these problems. So instead of taking too much time yourself to solve a thing like this, maybe you find you're getting frustrated, you can always just send it to us, and we will get back to you with the fixed version of your search just as soon as we can. Let me remind you of how you go about doing this.
Sometimes it is clear that there is only one particular search statement that is the source of the problem, and if that's the case, as here, you can just copy-paste that and put it into an email and send it to us. But many times it's going to be more helpful if you would send us your whole strategy in case the problem is originating farther back in your series of searches. Notice here, by the way, ProQuest Dialog is telling us what the problem is, that there are unbalanced parentheses. But if you were to want to send us the entire strategy, this is how you do it. You go up here where it says Recent Searches. That shows us all of the searches we've been doing. The first thing you want to do is to put these in chronological order. If you click on Set, now they are lined up as set 1 through 8 instead of the reverse. Then you would go to Export All Searches and choose RTF. I'm going to go ahead and save this. I could give it a different name, but I'll just use that default name. And then if you were to just save this to your hard drive and email it to us as an attachment, we'd be able to copy paste this into ProQuest Dialog and run the entire strategy, and that would help us to troubleshoot it. So that is what you are always free to do if you would like us to have a look at your strategy, or if there is some kind of problem with your strategy, save it as an RTF and email it to us. Here is the email address for sending us that strategy, or for any questions you might have. You are also welcome to give us a call. There are the numbers. Here is that contact info again, together with URLs for several of our support pages. Thank you again for taking this webinar. I hope you have enjoyed it and that you've gotten some useful tips and information from it. And please enjoy the rest of your day.